Many confuse the perception of physical beauty with mental beauty or mental symmetry, which we call intelligence. Or they confuse it with character or personality. In other words, the other's ability to make them feel beautiful or good about themselves or attractive, which makes this other immediately attractive to them as a source of this pleasing sensation. They attribute this to the subjectivity of beauty, revealing for one more time how obtuse the average modern is and how desperate he is to escape reality and its sometimes immutable, indifferent, cruel determinisms. Beauty is objective, and the human brain evolved to perceive it as order, indicating potential or indicating increased probability as a constriction of possibility, the latter being another word for chaos if it is pushed to the absolute extreme. Order is the perception of patterns, and patterns are about consistent, repetitive interactions. In other words, patterns are not about infinite possibilities, but about limited possibilities, which we call probability. Organisms find probability, order, attractive because they are themselves a pattern, and because nature is efficient, wanting to increase survivability by discounting the improbable and by focusing the energies available to each organism, which are limited themselves. The idea that beauty is subjective is ludicrous, and it exposes, like I said, the modern man's desperation and his nihilistic inclinations. Man does not decide what is beautiful on a whim or because of his particular tastes, but he evolves to appreciate symmetry, which already exists, to appreciate order, which is already present, to appreciate beauty, which is another way of saying order and symmetry, in all its forms. When he finds them, man evolves in nature. Man evolves within existence. Existence is not something he creates. Man and all life is an ordering, a becoming. And so he forages and is attracted by order, which promises to him an increase of his own order and his own symmetry. Man does not decide what is appealing or what is useful. These attributes are inherent in the otherness in relation to his own needs, and he discovers them present in the world. Taste is not willfully produced. It evolves to meet human needs. It evolves around human needs and based on human needs. The particularities of individual tastes are shaped around the particularities of the individual's needs, which always converge upon a shared species genetic source. If we prefer chicken to fish, this does not mean we decided to prefer one to the other, nor that the elements found in both fish and chicken as sources of organic energies are all that different, but it means that the difference between fish and chicken, them being different species, determines a difference in concentration of the common elements within them. We, as another species, needing these same elements which are found within us, find these elements tasty, and the degree in which they are found in each other species determines our preference for one or the other. Our own internal organic hierarchies and our own deficiencies, differing in degree from another's, determines what direction our tastes will take. And these tastes change over time, as we all know. They change as our organ hierarchies alter in time, also changing our body's chemistry. So when we use the term beauty, we mean order or symmetry of mind and form. There are three types of appreciation of beauty and otherness. Number one, physical symmetry, commonly called beauty or sexual attractiveness. The other displays an inherited symmetry, a fitness produced in the past, manifesting as appearance in the present. And number two, mental brain symmetry, commonly called intelligence or personality. The other displaying the brain's symmetry, usually the product of struggle or the stress of interacting, which exposes the individual as the product of this stress. In both cases, the absence of excess, of superfluity, resulting in a lean, harmonious outcome is a factor. With this absence of excess, the true essence of the other is expressed in his or her grace of acting, of movement in the physical, or of thinking in the mental. In both cases, stress is a necessary ingredient. The stress is what burns away excess, and if the body-mind survives this burning away phase, the process results in harmony, or a higher order, as this is determined by the inherited potentials, of course. One can never exceed one's own inherited limits. These two examples of beauty, symmetry, are interrelated, and one may give way to the other in the course of generations and interactivity. These are called erotic. Yet these two manifestations of beauty do not necessarily coincide. In fact, we may say that physical symmetry, if inherited with no personal effort or stress, is not responsible for it. In other words, may result in a lower development of brain symmetry. A lean, trim, harmonious symmetrical physicality may produce a fatty, dull, asymmetrical brain. The rule concerning the individual's preference for the path of least resistance applies here. Genetics, after all, only determines potential. To what degree this potential is developed or inherited in developing to its fullest is a product of environment or nurturing. The third definition of beauty is the one prone to subjective factors, and this is the one moderns prefer. 3. The way the other makes us feel by flattering, comforting, making us feel important, special, beautiful, etc. This is agape, the other form of love. Here no symmetry is required to be present, only the sensation of being made to feel symmetrical by the other, either because he or she compensates for our weaknesses or because of a motive in them. Most confuse how the other makes them feel with how the other is. The other makes us feel beautiful and or symmetrical, harmonious, but need not be beautiful or symmetrical himself. And if the other makes us feel bad or ugly or in turmoil, breaking our internal harmony, we ascribe to him or her this ugliness, even if he or she might be symmetrical and sexually appealing from an objective standpoint. The modern cannot separate his feelings from his perceptions, from his judgments, and so subjectivity dominates objectivity to the point where the latter is debased towards non-existence. In this last category, the beauty or ugliness of intent or of spirit, the motive of the other, or his character in regards to us and our interest, is what is being described. Not the actual other person, but his perceived intent. In this case, no matter how attractive he or she is, he is ugly to us. And no matter how ugly he is beautiful to us. Not from an objective standpoint, but from a personal, self-interested standpoint. But this is typical of moderns in general. When an idea troubles them, makes them feel sad, let's say, they ascribe this feeling to the other's intent, or to the other's spirit. If the idea, the theory, the other exposes them to, makes them feel afraid, then they ascribe this feeling to the other's essence, to the other's intent. The idea makes them feel this or that sensation, and then this sensation is ascribed to the one that produces it in them, simply by stating an idea, which is not inherently sad or fearful, but which stimulates these emotions in us. So any idea proposed to a modern follows the path from emotional reaction in them, stimulated by the particular words used to express the idea, towards reality, towards a projection upon otherness, typically nihilistic. It takes the inverted path. And this is why you can manipulate a modern by training, educating him to react to certain words, certain stimulations, in other words, that trigger certain reactions in them. Words that are connected with particular images, particular emotions, and other ideas. This is the brainwashing method. Beauty, in all its forms, is about symmetry or order, a repeating, consistent pattern which is superior in relation to the observer and to a perceived average. All value judgments being comparisons. Some put more emphasis on physical beauty being more shallow and base, and being unable to appreciate mental symmetry, nor understand it completely. They feel its power and are intimidated by it, but cannot relate to it. So the symmetry is accompanied by anxiety, fear, reducing in this way its effect. So mental symmetry can be perceived by a simpleton, a simpler mind, as something ugly, something terrifying, and because the fear in them is always associated with the other, they immediately interpret this as being proof that the other's intelligence is really terrifying, a monstrosity. It's ugly. Others still prefer mental symmetry or mental harmony of spirit, of intellect, which is on a level they can appreciate and exceeds the ephemeral, shallow perception of physical symmetry, the kind that is inherited and displays a past health and a reproductive potential, but not necessarily an immediately individual attribute, because potential, as I noted earlier, may or may not be cultivated to its fullest. In both cases, the sex of the individual appreciating is a decisive factor, for men are more interested in using other as a means, whereas female is burdened with the sexual role of having to be a means for another, which forces her to be more careful about who she chooses to dedicate the next 5 to 7 years to, in first gestating his genetic material inside of her, then birthing with the unavoidable risks this entails, and then weaning this offspring to an age where it can fend for itself. For the male, the work, as it were, the cost, the risk, comes before the moment of coitus, whereas for the female, it is present and then it also follows. This makes each sex's interests and their standards of judging the other different, but not entirely so. Symmetry, physical proportionality, is an indication of genetic superiority, which may or may not produce mental symmetry, because once inherited, this advantage results in lethargy, or in taking the path of least resistance. The individual born beautiful or with the genetic markers we call attractiveness, need not compensate or work for anything. This is the bimbo effect. The one born with an inferior display of genetic markers must compensate by developing his mental symmetry. But this does not mean that he can exceed the potentials he's inherited as genetic predispositions, only that he can cultivate whatever he was born with to compensate for his other deficiencies. Here the practice of faking it comes into play, and the female sex, being the genetic filtering agency, has evolved the perceptions to not be fooled by masculine pretenses that display an imitated superiority which may not be actual. Imitation and discerning it is a fundamental part of survival, and one many species evolved to exploit. In this age where human techniques and technologies has reached the level where all have access to them and can use them to compensate for these inherited deficiencies, pretentiousness becomes a common behavior, creating the illusion of parity. Getting an education, for instance, where you parrot the data you paid for and was passed on to you by licensed professionals, is often confused with intelligence. Plastic surgery, the abstracting power of money, the internet, now used to compensate for genetic failings, learned behaviors being aped, are all examples of how reality and fantasy are confused in modern systems. But all can sense on some level, and to some degree, on an intuitive, visceral level, who is truly intelligent or mentally symmetrical, just as they can all know who is beautiful, no matter what kind of modernistic claptrap they employ, what clothes they wear, what cars they drive, what houses they live in, to make it seem like beauty is subjective or culturally determined, and that all are potentially beautiful to someone, offering the psychological relief of perspectivism. Perspectivism being used in our age of sheltering and political correctness to create this illusion of parity. Physical symmetry, which we call beauty, and mental symmetry, which we call intelligence, is directly linked to inherited genetic potentials, appreciated differently by the sexes because of their different reproductive roles. This is called sex appeal, and an attraction based on desire to either use the other as a means to an end by uniting our genetic material with theirs, or as a desire to be the other's means, as to not waste their time on potentially inferior genes. This leaves us with the third category mentioned, which is not an objective judgment of the other's physical mental symmetry, but of how she or he makes us feel, which is the subjective element. And because modernity is about subjectivity and feelings rather than objective awareness and intelligence and rationality, this last category is used to define all other conceptions